on Shabbos, and you make a mistake, and instead of saying in the nighttime Shemona Esray, instead of saying Ata Kedashta, you say Ata Cheni.
Okay.
So the halacha is that you're supposed to finish the entire bracha of Ata Cheni until the end. The bracha ta Hashem Cheni Nadas.
With the bracha.
With the bracha. But there's two caveats to that. One is that you said both the word Ata and the word Kedashta. If you just said the word Ata, Ata could also be Ata Kedashta. And so to Mincha could also be, Ataecha. However, in Shacharis, you don't have that caveat, because in Shabbos, after Kel HaKadosh, next words are Yismach Moshe. So if you started the word Ata in Shacharis, then you'd have to finish the bracha. But again, this is only the second condition, and that is, it wasn't that you just were like, your lips were moving faster than your mind, and you went from a Kel HaKadosh, and you started saying Ata Cheni without thinking. If you started saying Ata Cheni without thinking, because your lips are just continuing to say Ata Cheni, because you're usually saying Ata Cheni, then you wouldn't finish the bracha. However, let's say you're holding your siddur up to the page of the weekday Shemona Esray, and then you said Ata Cheni, then you would finish the whole bracha in Ma'ariv, and the whole bracha by Mincha, or in Shacharis, if you just said the word Ata, you also would finish the entire bracha. What's the reason for this?
After you finish the bracha, then you go back to
Then you go back. After you finish the bracha, you go back to the Shabbos davening. What's the reason for this? The reason for this is because the Alter Rebbe says in Simrei Samaches that really the halacha should have been that you say all 18 brachas on Shabbos. However, the Chachamim didn't want to bother us to do all the brachas on Shabbos, and therefore we don't do all the brachas on Shabbos, but really it's appropriate to say all the 18 brachas on Shabbos. Now, there is another reason that's given, and that is you're not allowed to ask for your needs on Shabbos. You're not going to get into that reason. That's really relevant to our discussion, but the reason the Alter says over there is they don't want to make a tircha. They don't want to bother you. Since the whole point is not to bother you, but really it's appropriate to say it on Shabbos. Therefore, if you started saying it, you do finish it. How about on Musaf? On Musaf was established only for Shabbos. So Musaf was established to have 7 brachas, not to have Ata Cheni. So Shacharis, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, they were supposed to be 18 brachas, and you always mentioned Shabbos in those brachas, but the Chachamim shortened it and made it 7 brachas. That's for Shacharis, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. But Musaf, to begin with, was established just for the sake of Shabbos, and it never had any connection to the 18 brachas that we say during the week. What would happen in Musaf if you started saying Ata? Do you finish it in Musaf and finish the whole bracha of Ata Cheni? So Alter Rebbe says, no, you don't, because in Musaf, you never have 18 brachas. That's one opinion. Another opinion is that you do finish it. Why? Because but before we get to the second opinion, the first opinion is that even on Chol HaMoed, where we do say 18 brachas in the Shacharis prayer of Chol HaMoed, but in Musaf we don't. So there's no such thing as 18 brachas in Musaf. There never was such a thing. And in Musaf of Chol HaMoed, we just say the 7 brachas. And therefore, if you started saying Ata Cheni in Musaf, you wouldn't continue, because there's no such a thing as ever having 18 brachas in Musaf. There never was such a thing. There was never such a idea, never such an opinion. And therefore, if you started saying Ata Cheni, you would not finish the bracha. That's one opinion. Another opinion is that Musaf was also instituted also to be 18 bracha davening. Musaf was also supposed to be 18 brachas. And later it was shortened. And therefore, if you said Ata Cheni, you should finish it. Because it is, Musaf it was originally an 18 bracha davening, and later it was shortened to have 7 brachas. So since it was originally an 18 bracha davening, and it was shortened, but it really was appropriate to say 18 brachas from Musaf as well, if you said Ata Cheni, you're going back to the original, the OG, the original way it was established, and therefore you should continue and say the end of the bracha. What's the halacha? The Alter Rebbe says, since there's an argument, the general rule for blessings are, if you don't know if you should say a bracha or not, you don't say it, and therefore you do not say, you do not finish the bracha of Ata Cheni. Now, then Alter Rebbe discusses another scenario. What happens if you davened the entire Yontiv Shemona Esray, but you didn't daven with Yontiv Shemona Esray, You just daven Yontif Shemona Esrei.
Sorry, back up.
You daven on Yontif.
It's Shabbos?
It's
or Yom Tov?
it's Yontif.
It's Yom Tov, okay.
It's Yontif or it's Shabbos, and you davened the Shemona Esrei without saying any of the brachas of Shabbos. You said all the 18 brachas. 18 brachas, but you mentioned like a sort of like a Yalav Yahweh kind of thing. You mentioned Yismuchu Malchus, let's say. You say that paragraph in Shabbos.
Somewhere you entered that block.
You mentioned Shabbos somehow. You mentioned Shabbos.
Then you kept going with Shemona Esrei.
And you kept going Shemona Esrei. So as long as you mentioned Shabbos, you didn't say a bracha by itself. You didn't say a bracha for Shabbos. You didn't say Makadosh HaShabbos. You just mentioned Shabbos. Or in Musaf, you said may Hashem help Mashiach come, and we will then fulfill to bring you karbanis as we are commanded, and this carbon Musaf as well. As long as you said those words, even though you davened a regular Shemona Esrei, it works. It works as long as you said you mentioned Shabbos, you mentioned Yontif. As long as you mention Shabbos or Yetz. Okay, so that seems pretty clear. It's just enough to mention Shabbos, mention Yontif. It's good enough. If you have the weekday Shemona Esrei on Yontif, let's say, and you said Yalav Yahweh, it works. You mentioned Yontif, right? However, in Taf Pei Zayin, the Alter Rebbe says, what happens if it's Yontif and you're davening a Yontif Shemona Esrei, and you mention Yalav Yahweh, and you say Matzah says Yemasuka says you mention Yontif, but you conclude the bracha, and instead of saying Mekadosh Yisrael Vazmanim, instead of saying Hashem has sanctified the Jewish people and the times, instead you said Mekadosh HaShabbos.
Not Yom Tov.
Not Yontif. So we said before, as long as you mention Yontif somewhere, it's good enough. It works. But here, let's say you didn't just mention it anywhere. You said the regular Yontif Shemona Esrei, and you just made one tiny mistake. It's a tiny mistake, really, because Shabbos and Yontif are very similar. The Torah actually calls Yontif Shabbos in the Torah. It says you should count the Omer the day after Shabbos, and the Gemara says day after Shabbos really means day after Yontif. So Yontif is called Shabbos. I know when the grandfather got this from. I once asked my grandfather, how come on Yontif we say Mizmor Shilim and Shabbos? So he told me because Yontif is also called Shabbos. Could be that's the reason. I don't know. Anyway, so Mizmor Shilim Shabbos on Yontif. Anyways, in the morning of Yontif. So. So if you change though, and you didn't say Mekadosh Yisrael's man, you said Mekadosh HaShabbos, which is very, very similar. You're not Yaitze, do not collect the 100, you have to say Shemona Esrei all over again. But the question is why? If you said a weekday Shemona Esrei, 18 brachas a weekday Shemona Esrei, and just mention Yontif, it's good enough. And now you said Yontif Shemona Esrei, and you just finished off, and you messed up. Why aren't you Yaitze? So the Magen Avram addresses this. The Magen Avram says that the reason is like this: if you don't mention Yontiv at all, you don't say a bracha at all, so it's not as bad as saying the wrong bracha. Saying the wrong bracha is worse. So since you mentioned a different day, not the day of Shabbos, so therefore you're like uprooting the Shemona Esrei from its space, and you're making it not a Yontif Shemona Esrei, a Shabbos Shemona Esrei, and therefore you do not fulfill your obligation. That's what the Magen Avram says. And the Alter Rebbe quotes the Magen Avram in the Kuntres Achron, and he says this is what the Magen Avram answers in Siman Reish Amaches. However, the Magen Avram gives another answer in Taf Pei Zayin, a better answer. What's a better answer in Taf Pei Zayin? Magen Avram says in Taf Pei Zayin like this. Since, he says like this, there were really two different rules the Chachamim made. Rule number one was that when you daven Shemona Esrei on Shabbos, the weekday Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings that you're supposed to say on Shabbos, because as I said before, the 18 blessings really appropriate to say on Shabbos too, they said, add and mention Shabbos. That was takana number one. Rule number one was mention Shabbos somewhere in the davening Shemona Esrei. Then they made a second rule, and they said, no, don't do 18 blessings and just mention Shabbos. You should have only 7 blessings, and you should have the 7th blessing should be about Shabbos. So if you...
Do you know who made that change?
No. If you went to the OG takana, if you did the weekday Shemona Esrei, and you mentioned Shabbos, you're okay. You follow the original pattern, the original formula the Chacham established. So just because you mentioned Yontif, you mentioned Shabbos, you're following the original pattern, that's okay. But if you're saying a separate bracha by itself, and you're now using the language of the sages, you're using the bracha that the sages established. They established this new bracha, and you're saying Baruch Atah Hashem. You're saying a new bracha. If you say this bracha, but you don't say it the right way, then the rule is, if you change the matbeya chacham, if you change the form the chacham established, then you're not fulfilling obligation. So again, if you didn't say another bracha, then you're going back to the original rule the chacham made. That's fine. If you did that, you fulfill your obligation. But if you did say a bracha, that means you're following the new takana of the chachamim, and you're changing their takana. Then in that situation, the chachamim, then you're not fulfilling your obligation, because you have now gone against the pattern the chachamim have established. You've uprooted the rule of chachamim. Okay. So the question is like this: the Alter Rebbe, it looks like a little bit of a contradiction. What's the din if you daven musaf, right, and you say Ata Chaynin Musaf? What did we say before? Say Ata Chaynin Musaf. What's halacha?
Don't finish the bracha.
Don't finish the bracha. Very good. Because there was never any, according to this opinion, there was an argument about whether musaf was originally supposed to be 18 blessings or not, and the halacha follows the opinion that musaf was not meant to be 18 blessings, and therefore, if you said Ata Chaynin, we have a doubt who the halacha follows, but the major opinion, the more important opinion, is the opinion that musaf was originally 7 blessings, and therefore you said Ata Chaynin, you don't repeat it. However, the question is,
if you complete the bracha, if you complete that Torah,
if you daven all 18 brachas in musaf, and you mention Shabbos, how are you yotzeh? The main takana of musaf was 7 blessings, and now that was the way it was originally established as 7 blessings. So how come you don't have to repeat Shemona Esrei if you davened an 18 blessing musaf and you mentioned Shabbos? If you just add the words, we should fulfill the obligation that of our sacrifices, the korban tamah and the korban musaf. You're yotzeh. How are you yotzeh? The original establishment of musaf was, the OG takana of musaf was 7 blessings. What do we say? How come you cannot finish the bracha of Ata Chaynin? Because musaf doesn't have 18 blessings. So if you did say 18 blessings, you didn't say you uprooted the original takana the chacham who made it a 7 blessing davening. So how come you don't have to preach Shemona Esrei if you did 18 blessings for musaf? That's the question. If we follow the first opinion, which says that musaf never had 18 blessings, musaf only had 7 blessings, so then how come you are fulfilling your obligation by just mentioning Shabbos there when there was a clear establishment of the Chachamim that the formula of the bracha of the Shemona Esrei of musaf is 7 blessings? So we have an answer for this from the Levush. Levush says, actually, you're right. Levush says, if you follow the opinion who says that musaf was originally made as 7 blessings, then indeed, if you daven an 18 blessing davening and you mention Shabbos, you're not Yetzitakin. However, the El Yezuta says we find many opinions. All these opinions say that you do not have to repeat Shemona Esrei, and then all these same opinions also hold that if you started Ata Chaynin, you're not allowed to finish it. So how does it work? So the El Yezuta says another answer. He says a very geschmacka answer. He says, just like there was a doubt whether you could finish the bracha of Ata Chaynin, and we said don't finish the bracha of Ata Chaynin. Why not? Because there's another opinion which says that there was no such thing as 18 brachas and musaf, that if you can't finish it. So too, if you daven the whole Shemona Esrei of the weekday and you mention Shabbos, since there's an opinion like this, so Savik brachas ha'akel. There's a suffix, there's a doubt. Then there's a doubt, just like we're lenient, we don't tell you to finish the bracha Ata Chaynin, we also say Savak Brachas Hakel, and we say you can't repeat Shemona Esray over again because that was the you can't repeat Shemona Esray over again because there's a doubt whether or not you fulfill your obligation. One opinion says that Musaf originally did have 18 blessings, therefore you did fulfill your obligation. But the problem is like this: the Alter Rebbe, he clearly doesn't subscribe to this. The Alter Rebbe says, "Look in Tav Sim Tav Pei Zayin," and in Sim Tav Pei Zayin doesn't mention any of this. So actually, the Alter Rebbe, there was a Kuntres Achron of the Alter Rebbe in Sim Tav Pei Zayin, where he probably addressed this question, but we don't have the Tav Pei Zayin of the Alter Rebbe. But we do have other information from the language of Alter Rebbe in another Kuntres Achron. When he quotes what he said in Sim Tav Pei Zayin, it could be that this is the way it works. The Gemara Yerushalmi says clearly the source of this whole thing that you don't repeat Shemona Esrei again if you mention Shabbos. Where was it said originally? The Gemara Yerushalmi says the Gemara Yerushalmi says it straight out about Musaf. Gemara Yerushalmi not saying about Shachris. The Bais Yosef says, since it's true about Musaf, you just said a weekday Shemona Esrei, and you added a little part there about Shabbos, you fulfill the obligation. So basically, Yosef extrapolated for this also for Shachas and for Mincha as well. But the original place it said this was not about Shachas; it was about Musaf. So it's not about an argument, not because of a suffix. There was a clear thing about Musaf. But how could it? But why? If the Musaf was established as a 7 blessing Shemona Esrei, so why if you did an 18 blessing Shemona Esrei did you fulfill your obligation? So that's for this we have to l'chera say the first answer the Magen Avraham says that it's better to not say, let's say Yalav Yavin Shemona Esrei Rosh Chodesh. Better you didn't say anything at all than to say it and to say it wrong. So since you didn't since you davened weekday Shemona Esrei and you mentioned Shabbos, so that's better than saying Mekadesh HaShabbos on Yontiv where you changed from the Takanas Chachamim. Here it's okay because you didn't even go into the Takanas Chachamim. You just didn't mention at all. It's better to omit and not say the something than to say it wrong and to say the wrong day, like in the analogy before where you said Mekadesh HaShabbos instead of saying Kadosh Yisrael Bazman. Okay, any questions or comments? Shkeach.
Wow.